Well, what's up again there, guys? Brian here, the 3 Topics Game here to share with you one of my requested top list videos to share with you guys today. Now, this list was requested by one of my awesome viewers going by that name, so I want to thank you personally for sending me this idea. And I thought, hey, why don't we go over some of my, most disappointing video game sequels? Not necessarily games, but just sequels. And unfortunately, because of how selective I am with the type of games I choose to play and buy, I actually couldn't come up with a top 10 list, but I was able to come up with 5 games that are sequels to games that the prior entry was an absolutely incredible game. So to actually get these follow-ups was unfortunately rather disappointing. So if you do happen to enjoy my top 5 list by the end, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Keep track of me on my future videos. And remember, if you guys have any ideas for future top list videos or tier list ranking videos or reaction videos or just discussion videos in general, please let me know what you would like to see in the comments down below, and I will try to get it up as soon as I can, as well as to give you a shout out right at the beginning. So starting off with what is number 5 on my top 5 most disappointing sequels list, game is going to have to go to the sequel to the very popular 2 kind of rebooted Wolfenstein games in the form of Wolfenstein Young Blood. Now, I thought that this didn't do a very good job in either gameplay, exploration, upgrades, combat, even story to the follow-up to the prior 2 Wolfenstein games, which, in my personal opinion, that is my favorite era of Wolfenstein games. I did happen to play Wolfenstein 3D back in the 90s when I was much younger, but it really wasn't until the rebooted Wolfenstein games, at least when it came on the PlayStation 4 games, that I really got into the series. The story of playing as the Blaskovich's daughters went in a very weird direction, and just their personalities just seemed so goofy. I mean, don't get me wrong, Wolfenstein has, its goofy moments, but this kind of felt like it wasn't even in the same universe. I think gameplay-wise, it was a solid shooter, but again, this wasn't really all that fun, especially even when they added the co-op element, which that was kind of the big gimmick that this game had, was that it had co-op, and heck, some first-person shooter games aren't better when they're playing with, with co-op. Another thing about this game that I really just didn't like was just the overall direction. They made some unnecessary changes to the original style of game that I just couldn't understand. And it's just unfortunate because I always thought that this was going to be a lead up to a proper sequel to those Wolfenstein games, and unfortunately we haven't gotten one since, so I guess this is what we're left with, and this was the last entry in the Wolfenstein series, at least that I can remember. But yeah, I expected a lot out of this game, and unfortunately it fell really, really flat on its face, which is why it's number 5 on my list. Going into number 4, it's going to have to go to PlayStation 2's, or technically that era of Mortal Kombat games, in the form of Mortal Kombat Armageddon. Now, this is the sequel to Mortal Kombat Deception, and this game's problem is that I think the developers at the time, which I do believe this was still under Midway, had the ambition of making a massive Mortal Kombat game that included every single Mortal Kombat fighter. Now, while that seems like a really interesting idea, unfortunately, it didn't exactly work out as well as I'd hoped it would be. I would say gameplay-wise, this wasn't even a major change from Deception. I mean, at least when you played Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance and then played Deception afterwards, you could kind of tell that there was a slight gameplay change that showed improvement. Unfortunately, that was not the case with Armageddon. They practically just copied and pasted the gameplay style. Yes, they did add a kind of character customization system, but I don't think it really worked all that well. And they were extremely cheap with the character endings. I mean, I believe this game had over 40 fighters across all the Mortal Kombat games, and when you actually beat their specific towers, it didn't even give you like a really good cutscene. I mean, that's kind of one thing that, Mortal Kombat games are known for, is kind of knowing what happened to these characters when they won. But all it showed was each individual character just, practicing their martial arts as they had like a little voiceover. And I thought that was really, really cheap. And it also didn't help that they also had a campaign that was kind of creative, but I don't think worked out as well. It followed the character of Sujinko, and it showed how he was kind of manipulated into releasing Onaga, or technically releasing Blaze in some cases. I think that's really what the story was about. And though it was an interesting idea. I just don't think it worked out very well. And I think we've attempted something. I mean, that's kind of somewhat similar to what we have in the invasion mode that we have in the current Mortal Kombat game. And a lot of people don't like that. So it's just unfortunate that they didn't really seem to learn their campaign lesson from the past and are kind of somewhat repeating that mistake now. But yeah, overall, Mortal Kombat Armageddon was a major downgrade from what we had in Deception, which that kind of led to the ultimate, somewhat almost semi reboot. I mean, it didn't quite get there yet. We had to go to Mortal Kombat versus DC before we got the reboot. But yeah, this was like the last pure Mortal Kombat game that we got, and yeah, it didn't really end the 3D era on a high note, which is why it's number 4 on my list. Going into number 3 is a game that I personally like a number of elements about this game, but I do not deny that this unfortunately was a major downgrade compared to its prior entry, which even some people don't even like that entry, and this is in the form of Resident Evil 6. Now, I understand that there's a number of people that did not really enjoy Resident Evil 5, but I personally still think it's my second favorite Resident Evil game of all time, and it still remains my favorite co-op game that I've ever played of all time. I always go back and replay this with friends and family, and I always have a blast playing it. Yeah, the AI could have some problems at times, but heck, in some cases, the AI was actually more useful than playing with a human partner. But going into Resident Evil 6, I think the problem was that they tried to do too much too fast. It didn't have a clear focused direction on what they wanted to try to tell. Now, sure, it was kind of an interesting idea that they had 4 different campaigns that had 4 different types of style of gameplay. But I think by doing that, you just kind of make a mess. I mean, overall, without question, Leon's campaign actually felt the most survival horror. I think if they made just a whole game focusing on that sort of campaign, I think the game would have been better. But when you throw in like a full-out shooter campaign involving Chris, it doesn't even feel like Resident Evil anymore. I mean, now we're taking on enemies that are like actively shooting at us back. And don't get me wrong, there were a few enemies in Resident Evil 5 and 4 that had enemies that used guns and shot back at you, but it was very not too common. But that was the entire campaign for Chris. Now, when it came to Jake and Sherry's campaign, it was a little bit in the middle, but it was okay. And then you had Ada's campaign that kind of focused a little bit more on stealth, but heck, I didn't even think the stealth elements worked all that well. So when you have 4 different stories with 4 different styles all trying to kind of mix with each other, you get like a major mess. And I didn't even think that the mercenary mode was all that fun. And when you can't get the campaign down and the mercenary mode down, you have a game that is a bit of a mess. Now again, I do still have some occasional fun with this game and sometimes go back and replay it, but yeah, it is a major downgrade from Resident Evil 5, which is why I perfectly understand why they decided to go back and take things in a more horror direction with Resident Evil 7, even though I didn't approve them turning into a first-person shooter game. But heck, I do agree that a change was needed, which is why Resident Evil 6 is number 3 on my list. Going on into number 2 is a game that took way too long to come out. And when the product eventually came out, it was by far absolutely not worth the wait. And I am not talking about Duke Nukem Forever. I am talking about Kingdom Hearts 3. Now, Kingdom Hearts 3 is not a bad game, but when you compare how much time it took for this game to come out, this game came out an entire decade too late. And the product that we actually got, I do not think actually worked. I mean, for starters, they ripped out anything that was Final Fantasy. And that was kind of the whole point, the concept of Kingdom Hearts was what would happen if you took Disney characters and Final Fantasy characters and put them into one game. When you rip the Final Fantasy element out, you're missing an entire crucial part of Kingdom Hearts, and like no one seemed to notice. On top of that, the story of Kingdom Hearts 3 had no real middle section. You just started at the game, went through a couple little worlds, and then you're instantly shot it into the end-game story period arc, and it kind of ends on a little bit of a whimper. And it also didn't help that the combat system was way too easy. Sora is so OP in this game that it's not even fun. Now, don't get me wrong. I do believe that when it comes to at least the primary 2 Kingdom Hearts games in the form of Kingdom Hearts 1 and Kingdom Hearts 2, I always felt that the combat for Kingdom Hearts 1 was slower, but the way it was structured made the game seem longer than it actually was, compared to Kingdom Hearts 2, where the combat was actually faster, but the enemies could actually adapt to you, and so it was always still a little bit of a challenge, even on the lower difficulties. But heck, I was playing Kingdom Hearts 3 on proud difficulty, and I promise you, I did not die once. Enemies, bosses were all taken out with very little difficulties, and it was kind of disappointing. Like, I wanted a challenge. So you give me a game that has a very non-existent storyline that no one can really understand. You rip out the Final Fantasy element, and you make your gameplay so easy that it's not even a challenge. Heck, this game completely killed my interest in Kingdom Hearts. I don't know when Kingdom Hearts 4 plans on coming out, but if I had to guess, by the time that game actually comes out, most of us who even started playing this game, when this franchise, when it first started, will probably be in our 40s. And by that point, I won't even care anymore. So heck, while Kingdom Hearts 3 is not a bad game, I give this game personal credit for killing my interest in any more Kingdom Hearts games, which is why it's number 2 on this list. Taking the number 1 spot, and by far the most disappointing video game that I've ever played in my life, or disappointing sequel I've ever played in my life, has to go to Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2. What the hell was LucasArts thinking with this? 9 months. They had a development period of 9 months to get this game out. Why did they have to do that? The first Force Unleashed game was not only one of the most successful, best-selling Star Wars games of all time, it still to this day remains one of my top 5 favorite Star Wars games ever. And they could have handled this so much better, but the biggest crime that this game has is that despite its development cycle, this game is piss poor short. This game is at most 4 hours long, and that's how long it took me to beat this game on the hardest difficulty the first time out. And I went out of my way to the midnight releasing of this and got the collector's edition. So you could just guess how stupid I felt getting this game. Now, don't get me wrong. I think visually this game looks really, really good, even by today's standards. I think that there was a potential to tell a really, really good story, but like it ends so quickly, and like not much happens in it. I mean, okay, you play as a clone of Starkiller Galen Merrick. He leaves Kamino to find General Coda, and then he makes a pit stop to Dagobah for like 5 minutes, and then he comes back to Kamino to find Juno. I'm like, where's the planet hopping? I mean, it just felt like they were so drunk on their success from the first game that they wanted to push another sequel out as quickly as possible. And that was just the worst kind of decision. Like, look, I mean, I look at all these other games, and they may be disappointing, but at least development was not the issue. They weren't short games. They had problems, but I'm like, the one thing you cannot mess up is you can't feel cheap. And that is what The Force Unleashed 2 felt like. It not only is short, it is cheap. And could have been a really, really fascinating game here because there are some really good elements. I do like the improvement to the combat system. They made some major improvements over the first game, but unfortunately, the game ends before you even have time to really enjoy them. So, yeah, I'm still upset about that, which is why to this day, it still remains the most disappointing video game sequel that I've ever played. So, those are my list of my top 5 most disappointing video game sequels. I'd like to know what are some sequels to games that you thought were disappointing. Let me know in the comments down below, and like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll see you next time.